Now, the alleged victim of a Tory MP arrested on suspicion of rape has called for his identity to be made public in order to protect his constituents. This comes as Parliament is set to return next week. She wants an MP or peer to use parliamentary privilege to name the suspect when they come back from their summer recess break. The former minister, who is in his 50s, was arrested earlier this month after the police received allegations of rape and sexual assault on 4 separate incidents. But should the identity of the suspect ever be made public? We'll take your calls on this as well. Natalie Collins is a gender justice specialist. Let's start, Natalie, with that question, fundamental one. Should the identity of a suspect be made public? Afternoon.
Afternoon. Well, until 2016, the UK government, if you were a MP, then the information about if you'd been arrested for a crime, that was reported publicly. And it changed in 2016 because of a risk around privacy rules, and that actually MPs were not being afforded the same degree of privacy as those who were not MPs. But there's big concerns about this case. The woman who reported this to the Conservatives reported it in April. It took until August for that to then go to the police, and unfortunately what we've seen is a massive increase in the length of time it takes to get from a report to the police to charging for sexual violence. So it was 53 days from the reporting to the police to the charging in 2015 and 2016. It's now 145 days on average, so often a lot more than that, or sometimes less than that, to get a charge. So the reality is that this could take until halfway through next year potentially, or at least the beginning of next year, before we even see a charge. So waiting until then seems irresponsible, given that this man could be a risk to the public.
But what is gained by naming him?
Well, it means that there is, if he is a risk to people, if he's perpetrated sexual violence, that actually the people who he could be a risk to, obviously somebody who's in a position of authority like an MP, there is a lot of power that comes with that, a lot of assumption that that person is safe, that person should be entitled to kind of access to vulnerable people. And so when somebody is in a position of authority like that, there should be some way of them being protected from people with the potential risks that come with this. For instance, if a teacher was arrested on this sort of crime, they would be suspended from work. There are other places of work where if somebody was arrested with this sort of crime, they would be suspended. So why should an MP not be suspended?
But on that basis, then we should name the woman on the basis she might have made it up.
No, because under law, rape suspects are given anonymity. We know there's lots and lots and lots of evidence that very few rape victims are making this.
No, I get that, and let me make it clear, I totally understand that, and I'm not in favour of naming her. But if the basis is, well, what if they are, they might be dubious or go on to do something else, or etc., as you outlined with the alleged assailant here, then you'd have to apply the same logic to the person making legally, wouldn't you?
No, because obviously if she went on to accuse somebody else of this crime, the police would then know, hang on a second, the same person is making an allegation against another person. So the right people would know that there is more than one allegation being made, whereas this is about the public being kept safe from a potential sexual predator. As I say, that in other employment scenarios, which isn't an MP, and you should suggest, I would suggest MPs should be held to a higher standard given the power and the pay that they're given, that actually the MP should be no different. A teacher would be suspended. There are lots and lots of different job roles where somebody would be suspended if they'd been arrested, and that should be the case in this situation as well.
It is, of all the kind of crimes, the problem with this, Natalie, as you'll be aware, it's the mud sticks scenario. If it turns out this this MP has done nothing wrong, and there is a case and they're found not guilty, then the fact they've been identified, that sticks around, doesn't it? Like a bad smell. That never really goes away, by definition of the kind of crime we're talking about.
I think this is the idea or the suggestion that is given around this crime, but we only have to look in the White House in America to see that such allegations don't necessarily stick or affect your ability to become the most powerful person in the world. So I think the idea that somebody being accused of this definitely means that their career is over, or that the mud sticks or that kind of stuff, it's just not accurate. And that's not what we see in terms of men who've been accused of these sorts of crimes. There are plenty of famous men who've been accused of all sorts of crimes, and that they've they've been able to continue working, they've been able to continue with the same work they did before. Very few people, although this idea that being accused of rape will ruin your life, the reality is that particularly for people in positions of significant power, it actually doesn't.
So you think it's less painful if you're in a powerful position to be accused of rape?
I don't think it affects you in the same way that often people suggest it is. This idea of mud sticking. There are plenty of celebrities who've been convicted of all sorts of things, and people in positions of power who
I think Cliff Richard would beg to differ on something like that. He said his life was ruined. Paul Gambaccini, Bill Roach from Coronation Street, all of these people had their lives, pretty wrecked over a long period of time, sustained inquiries and court case. There was nothing to see here, and none of them have fully got over that.
Yeah, and there are plenty, thousands and thousands and thousands of rape victims whose lives have been ruined and there's been no justice for them. So
sure, no, I get that, but it's not a competition, is it? I mean, the best way, surely, is to have anonymity for both people.
Well, the evidence shows us that anonymity doesn't actually help justice. It doesn't enable us to kind of create justice. And actually, this isn't about...
It creates injustice, doesn't it, for the alleged perpetrator? Because the victim isn't named, but the perpetrator is, usually.
Yeah, that's in order so that they're named once they're charged. Obviously, we're not talking about a situation where somebody is not being named after they've been charged. We're talking about safeguarding people and somebody being suspended from a very authoritative and powerful position.
But this person hasn't been charged with anything, of course.
No, but in lots of roles, if you have been arrested as a result of a crime like this, you would be suspended from work until that.
But you're saying that it's such a heinous, specific kind of crime that warrants naming, but you're not recognising your own adjectives, as it were, when it comes to what it does to somebody's life.
No, I'm not talking about the type of crime. I'm talking about the risk of safeguarding to members of the public. That actually this isn't about how awful the crime is. It's the fact that the awfulness of this crime could be perpetrated against more people if this person isn't named or at least suspended from work, so that they're not exposed to the public at this time.
Okay, Natalie, thank you. Natalie Collins, gender justice specialist, the alleged victim, a Tory MP who is suggesting he should be named, and she's calling for an MP or a peer. It's an extraordinary move. An MP or a peer to use parliamentary privilege to name the suspect when they come back from the summer recess. I think that would be a curious position for another politician to put themselves in. I mean, it's kind of there is something implicit within doing that would suggest you think the person is guilty, and I would have to reasonably assume without any kind of knowledge of the case. And I've always been... I know the argument is that, look, if somebody comes forward and they're charged and you name them, then other people will go, wow, that person attacked me, but I never thought anybody would believe me. I'm told, and I'm sure somebody will put me right, that actually doesn't lead to the success. I know there are examples when it does. I'm thinking Stuart Hall, perhaps an example. Although I'm sure I've heard people counter even that the success was actually down to the police, not down to anything else. It's a tricky one. I understand that it's tricky, but I'm not really in favour of anybody being named in these kind of cases by definition of the kind of case that you're talking about here. I mean, it is something that I think probably besmirches you for a long time in terms of how people look at you, how they trust you, but also how you feel. I mean, I've interviewed people who've been, and I say this not to in any way to divorce or dilute the experience of a victim, that's a given. But if you speak to somebody who has been wrongly accused of something like this and what they went through as a result, it is horrific. It is horrific. Is it because he's an MP that he should be named? Does that make a difference? I mean, she said teachers should be told they can't go back to... This man can go back to work. That's the other issue. He can go back to work, whereas if you're a teacher, you wouldn't be able to go back to work. But if you worked in other areas, you would be able to go back to work, I guess. 0344 499 1000. We'll take your calls on that as well. You're listening to Ian Collins on Talk Radio. Just gone 2:15.